deep underground, in an old Cold War-era bunker hidden in the dry steppes of southern Ukraine, tension filled the air. This was Coordination Point number 8, one of the most secretive drone command centers in the country. The room was stark. Steel floors that rang like a submarine with every step, 80-centimeter reinforced concrete walls, thick blue cables stretching to the ceiling, and a generator humming in the corner. Inside, 12 officers sat at glowing screens, each with precise role: routing, encryption, fire coordination, thermal analysis. They were not just drone pilots. They were battle managers, orchestrating strikes like conductors of a digital symphony. 4 days before the attack, an encrypted signal flashed across their main display. A red circle lit up on the satellite map, southeast of Zaporizhia. A small reconnaissance group operating deep behind Russian lines had sent the coordinates: a massive fuel train scheduled to move through Tokmak toward Melitopol. Satellite data confirmed the intel. At a regional logistics hub, Russian troops were loading 30 rail cars, packed with 150 tons of explosive fuel, aviation gasoline, diesel, and heavy industrial mixtures. This wasn't just cargo. It was the bloodline of Russia's war machine. Without it, tanks would stall, helicopters would never take off, and armored columns would grind to a halt. The analysts knew the strike could not come at the start of the journey, when defenses were strongest. The perfect moment was mid-route, at a temporary refueling station where the train would be trapped with no cover, no diversions, and its tanks filled to the brim. The target was locked. Now came the question: how to destroy it. On a small airstrip 250 kilometers away, 7 Mykolaiv V-2 drones stood ready, just over a meter long with a wingspan of 1.5 meters. Each weighed barely 5 kilograms. Their polymer bodies carried thermal cameras, encrypted GPS navigation, and, most importantly, a shaped charge capable of unleashing shock waves at 9,000 meters per second. They were small, they were silent, and when unleashed, they would turn Russia's fuel into fire. On the darkened airstrip, ground crews moved with surgical precision. One after another, the 7 Mykolaiv V-2 drones hummed to life. Their electric motors purred almost silently, blades cutting the night air like whispers. There was no dramatic roar of engines, no thunder of artillery, just a quiet whine as each drone lifted from its launch rail and vanished into the darkness. Within 3 minutes, all 7 were airborne, climbing to barely 15 meters above the ground, skimming fields, treetops, and riverbanks to evade Russian radar. From the command bunker, operators watched through grainy thermal feeds. On their screens, the drones appeared as tiny glowing dots moving across a vast black canvas. Every few seconds, coordinates flashed green as encrypted signals bounced between satellites and the drones on board autopilots. Each one carried a specific task. 2 would target the locomotive, 3 the central tanker cars, and the remaining pair the rear tanks to trap the fuel inside a fiery corridor. The silent approach. Flying low and steady at 120 kilometers per hour, the swarm drifted across no man's land. They passed over abandoned trenches, fields scarred with craters, and the faint outlines of ruined villages. The drones made no sound loud enough for guards or patrols to notice. For Russian sentries on duty, the night was still. They had no idea that death was gliding toward them just a few meters above the earth. The target in sight. At 2:51, the thermal optics on the lead drone caught its prey, a black silhouette stretching along the tracks. 30 rail cars, fuel tanks gleaming faintly under moonlight, locked in place at a refueling junction. Engines idled at the head of the train. Guards smoked cigarettes near the platform. Completely unaware, the drone slowed, adjusting altitude, each locking onto its programmed rail car. The command center went silent. The operators knew what would happen next, but even they held their breath. 7 drones, 6 minutes, 150 tons of fuel. At exactly 2:53, the first drone struck. It dove straight into the locomotive's engine compartment, its shaped charge detonating with a sharp, surgical blast. In an instant, the front of the train was engulfed in fire. The locomotive screeched, wheels locking as molten steel sprayed into the night. Seconds later, 2 more drones pierced the central section of the convoy. One slammed into the 12th rail car, another into the 14th. Both were tankers brimming with aviation fuel. The impact tore them open like tin cans, releasing torrents of liquid fire. Within moments, the tracks glowed orange as flames spread in both directions. The chain reaction. The 4th and 5th drones hit their marks almost simultaneously, striking the rear tankers. That sealed the convoy's fate. The explosion ignited a wall of fire on both ends, trapping the remaining cars in a blazing corridor. The heat was so intense that nearby fuel tanks detonated without even being touched, bursting one by one in violent eruptions. By the time the 6th drone struck, the entire line of 30 cars was a rolling inferno. Explosions echoed like artillery barges, each blast launching steel fragments into the air. Fuel rained down in sheets of fire, igniting the ground, the tracks, and even the small station platform nearby. Guards who had been smoking cigarettes moments before were thrown off their feet, running in terror through a storm of flame and shrapnel. And then came the 7th drone. It slammed into the junction itself, where pipes and pumps fed the refueling station. The strike ruptured underground storage tanks, unleashing a final fireball that consumed everything within 100 meters. The shockwave shattered windows in villages kilometers away. The sky turned red, visible from Zaporizhia to Melitopol. 6 minutes that changed the night. From a first strike to the last, the entire attack lasted barely 6 minutes. 6 minutes to turn 150 tons of Russian fuel into fire and smoke. 6 minutes to cripple an entire supply operation. 6 minutes to remind both armies and the watching world that in modern war, size does not guarantee safety. For the Ukrainian operators watching from their bunker, the screens glowed with a vision they would never forget. 7 glowing dots merging into one massive firestorm, their mission complete. By 3:10 a.m., the railway station was no longer recognizable. What had once been an organized refueling hub was now a field of twisted steel and towering flames. The 30 rail cars had fused into a single smoldering wreck. Tankers splitting open like tin cans, their contents spilling across the ground and igniting in rivers of fire. The firestorm. Witnesses from nearby villages described the blast as an earthquake. Windows shattered, roofs trembled, and the night sky glowed red for hours. Columns of fire rose more than 100 meters into the air, feeding on the endless streams of diesel and aviation fuel. The explosions continued in secondary bursts as one tank after another collapsed under the heat, creating a chain reaction that burned until dawn. Russian firefighters and emergency crews rushed to the scene but were powerless. Every attempt to approach was met with new detonations. Vehicles parked nearby ignited instantly, their metal frames buckling under the intense heat. By sunrise, nothing remained of the fuel train except charred husks scattered along the rails. Reconnaissance at dawn. At 6 o'clock, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones returned to the site. Their cameras transmitted images of a scene out of a nightmare, blackened craters along the tracks, scorched trees lining the horizon, and smoke still rising in massive plumes visible from dozens of kilometers away. The footage confirmed what operators already knew. The strike had succeeded beyond expectation. The drones also captured the chaos of Russian troops on the ground. Soldiers moved aimlessly through the wreckage, coughing through thick smoke, searching for survivors or salvageable equipment. But there was nothing left. Every drop of fuel, 150 tons in total, had been consumed by fire. The collapse of logistics. The destruction of the convoy sent shockwaves through the Russian command structure. That fuel had been destined for armored divisions near Melitopol and for helicopter units stationed deeper in occupied territory. Without it, entire formations were left stranded. Tanks could not advance. Helicopters remained grounded. Trucks, one expected to resupply artillery batteries, stood idle. Russian commanders scrambled to find replacements, but the loss was too sudden and too large. Even attempts to reroute smaller convoys met resistance. Ukrainian partisans sabotaged roads, artillery targeted alternative routes, and the threat of further drone swarms loomed over every fuel depot. The rail hub itself, once a crucial artery, was rendered useless for weeks. The melted tracks, cratered ground, and charred wreckage blocked any attempt to restart traffic. Engineers who tried to begin repairs worked under the constant hum of Ukrainian reconnaissance drones circling above, knowing another strike could come at any moment. For months, Russian commanders boasted of their secure logistics, insisting that long fuel convoys and rail shipments were untouchable. But the strike on the Tokmak junction ended that illusion overnight. 7 drones, each the size of a backpack, had destroyed 150 tons of fuel and left a crater in the very heart of Russia's supply chain. It was not just a loss of resources. It was a realization that even the most protected transport arteries could be reached, targeted, and erased in minutes. Impact on the battlefield. The immediate effect was paralysis. Tank battalions that had been preparing for local counterattacks were forced to sit idle. Helicopter crews grounded their aircraft for lack of aviation fuel. Artillery batteries reported delays as their resupply trucks could not move without diesel. What was meant to be a regular frontline rotation turned into a logistical nightmare. For Ukrainian troops, it meant breathing space. Fewer barges, fewer armored pushes, and more opportunities to take initiative. A symbol of drone warfare. Globally, the strike was seen as a textbook example of asymmetric warfare. The cost difference was staggering. 7 low-cost Ukrainian drones had destroyed resources worth millions of dollars and months of Russian planning. It demonstrated a new reality. In the 21st century, wars are not necessarily won by the biggest tanks or the longest convoys, but by who can control the sky with drones. Military analysts across NATO described the Tokmak strike as a turning point. It validated the investment into Ukraine's drone programs and signaled that small, precise systems could change the balance of entire sectors of the front. For countries watching from afar, it was a warning. The age of traditional logistic security was over. Psychological shock. Perhaps the most devastating consequence was psychological. Russian soldiers knew fuel was their lifeline. Watching an entire train of 30 tankers vanish in 6 minutes broke morale far more than the loss of shells or equipment ever could. Rumors spread quickly. If one fuel train could be annihilated, none were safe. Every convoy became a moving target. Every driver a potential victim of the next drone swarm. The message to the Kremlin. For Putin's inner circle, the strike was a humiliating reminder. No amount of censorship could hide fireballs seen from 40 kilometers away. No propaganda could erase the images of a train yard turned into a flaming wasteland. Ukraine had proven that it could hit deep, at will, and with surgical precision. In just 6 minutes, 7 drones reshaped the calculus of an entire front line. The lesson was unmistakable. Size no longer guarantees safety. Speed, precision, and ingenuity ruled the battlefield now.